So it is 7 o'clock. I'm going to call the meeting to order. This is the Town of Lancaster Conservation Commission meeting of September 10th, 2024. I'll begin by calling the roll. Jim LaValle. Jim, you're on mute.
Oh, sorry, I'm here.
Dennis Hubbard.
Yep.
Carl Fawcett.
Here.
Dave Millett. I don't see Dave Millett on, and we have Conservation Agent Brad Stone. Our first item on the agenda tonight is continued notice of intent for Zero Heritage Lane. I don't see.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, we do have a continuance request for that one.
Okay. Happy to the next meeting, which is September 24th.
I'll make a motion to continue the hearing for Zero Heritage Lane to our next meeting on September 24th, 2024.
Second.
Just to confirm, Brad, it was the request was to the next meeting. Brad?
I believe so. I'm just double checking real quick. Yes, that's correct. Next meeting.
Okay. So we've had a motion made. Sorry, I forgot who made the motion.
Dennis.
And seconded by?
I second it. Carl.
Okay, seconded by Carl. Okay. This will be a roll call vote. Jim LaValle.
Aye.
Dennis Hubbard.
Aye.
Carl Fawcett.
Aye.
Tom Seidenberg also votes aye. Okay. Next up on the agenda, we have a continued notice of intent for 10 Fire Road 54. I see a number of people on the call. Do we have Bill? Yep, Bill, you want to bring us up to date? Bill Hannigan? Hi, Bill, are you there? E.M. Pascarella, could you please mute? Thank you.
You were somewhere in.
Can you wait a minute?
So Bill is either not hearing us or unable to mute. Bill Hannigan, can you, are you there? Do one of the quills want to speak up? Are the quills on? Yep, I see the quills.
Hey, Tom, this is Jeremy. Bill should be on. I'm not sure if he's having a little bit of technical difficulties at the moment.
Yeah, we'll just give him a moment. It looks like he left. He's probably trying to come back in. Just to note for the record that Dave Millett has joined at 7:04.
Yes, I have.
Okay, while we wait for Bill to join, I don't know, Attorney Nyland, I saw you went off mute. Did you want to make some comments?
Well, I thought since by default, I think that what Bill was going to do was just a walk through what we were hoping to accomplish tonight, which was to get agreement in terms of the area that we consider to be subject to the vernal pool exemption. At the last meeting, we talked about having a site visit. I know that a site visit took place, and I think that that's what we were looking to accomplish tonight, is to solidify that so then we can, proceed to revise the notice of intent to reflect the work in those areas. I think that's what our intent is for this evening.
I agree. I think that's a good goal for tonight. Hoping Bill can get online and we can have that discussion shortly.
And I'm not able to lead that discussion because I wasn't on the site visit, so I think it would be more appropriate. Hopefully the Bill will join and then maybe if not, maybe Brad can walk us through or the commission can in terms of how you see that site visit.
I think I'd like to hold off on any further conversation until Bill Hannigan's able to join. He's coming back in now. We'll give him a few moments to see if he can connect to audio, if he's past his issues.
Perfect. Thank you.
Hi, Bill. Are you able to unmute and talk now? Okay, he's not able to unmute. I don't know, Brad, are you able to unmute Bill for him? I don't know if that's a control you have.
All I can do is ask to unmute.
Okay. So Bill, I think in the past, other users have found that if they reboot their machine, I don't know if you've tried that already, that might work. I don't know if you completely exited out of Zoom and got back in, that might also work. So I think for the moment, while Bill addresses his issues, I think we'll table this. I think, Brad, we have a couple of other items on the agenda that we can continue. Why don't we work through that right now and not waste people's time?
Yep.
Yeah, Attorney Nyland, you've got your hand up. Go ahead.
I did reach Bill and he wasn't able to get in and he is rebooting again. So yeah, hopefully after your next item, we'll be ready. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, Brad, if I think some of these others are continuations, if we can just go through them, is 121 a continuation?
121. Well,
Right.
we've got 0 North Main Street before that.
I just want to give Bill a chance to come in and then we'll take that hearing. So if we could just spend a minute to continue some of these others and then just get back to 10 Fire
Okay,
Road 54.
so 121 Fire Road 11 did request a continuance, yes.
Okay, to the next meeting.
Correct.
Happy to take a motion for that.
I'll make a motion to continue our hearing for 121 Fire Road 11 to our next meeting, September 24th, 2024.
I'll second.
All right, motion's been made by Dennis, seconded by David to continue to the next meeting, September 24th. This will be a roll call vote. Jim LaValle.
Aye.
Dennis Hubbard.
Aye.
Carl Fawcett.
Aye.
Dave Millette.
Aye.
And Tom Seidenberg also votes aye. All right, thank you. I don't think we have other continuations, right? Is that correct, Brad?
That's correct.
Okay. I see Bill back yet. Don't see Bill Hannigan back yet.
And we go on to number 3 and then come back to it.
Yeah, I think that's what we'll do. We'll table that while Bill is rejoining. So we'll go next. We have a continued notice of intent for 0 Main Street, map 24, parcel 41A. Who do we have on the call representing this project?
I'm here. My name's Dan Hazen with Elbag Engineering.
Hi, Dan. Welcome. Want to bring us up to date?
Yeah, so we've had some reviewed a couple of comment letters from Brad. I believe we've addressed all his items. We sent him a revised plan today, adding the 25 and the 200-foot wetland, the 25-foot wetland offset and the 200-foot riverfront area lines. We added a detail for the driveway crossings and added a note that the erosion control is at the top of the berm. There was a site walk out there, I believe, recently. So at this point, I think unless Brad has some more comments or questions.
Brad?
So we actually received a couple of plans today. So the latest one I hadn't had a chance to fully go over yet. I did have a phone call with Mr. Elbag either late morning or early this afternoon, kind of going over the last minute changes that I was looking to see. And why don't I see if I can share this real quick?
Would you like me to share my screen? Mine's up right here.
Actually, yeah, if you wouldn't mind. Thank you, Dan.
Sure. So can everyone see this?
Yep.
Okay. So this is the 25-foot no disturb line that we added in today. Comes up and then cuts across here. The 200-foot river front line for the rear, for the southerly wetland or river, runs along here. And the 200-foot riverfront area line for the intermittent stream along the edge of Main Street is back here. So essentially the entire property is within the 200-foot riverfront area for either the rear intermittent stream or the front intermittent stream. We did show a detail over here, the driveway crossing, calling out 3-inch minus gravel under the pipe, 3-inch minus gravel compacted in 6-inch lifts above and around the pipe. And then we adjusted the notes up here showing that the erosion in the intermittent stream. I also did update the stream crossing standards for we increased the length by 4 feet of the wetland, the 4-foot diameter HDPE pipe that is at this in the intermittent stream that runs along Main Street in the drainage area here. So the only thing that changed with that would be the openness ratio increased a little bit. We're still under that, but we meet all the other criteria.
Okay. Thank you. Brad, do you have any further comments?
So the culvert detail was really the biggest thing I was looking to get finalized. I'm finishing up looking at it now. So the revision that I forwarded to the commission first thing this morning, if you look at it, it's changed a little bit. They added the boulder retaining wall in there. You know, it looks like there's a better foundation underneath the pipe itself. The other concern, construction-wise, I had is I just wanted to make sure that that pipe was filled with the appropriate material. There was an initial note to remove what was there and use basically the existing soils. I don't know how much of that may have still been present because there was a culvert installed there before. So ultimately, I think I just want to see that a wetland scientist puts eyes on this as it's being constructed, so that we do have native stream bed type materials in there for the embedment. I don't think that's going to be too much work, just to have somebody oversee that briefly as it's going in. And the final comment I had was with respect to the application. We're still waiting for an owner's signature on that. So in all of my review letters, it's said that. So if someone could please get that to me. I really don't think we should be sending a decision out the door, for instance, without that signature on there. But that's something that should be pretty easy to accomplish.
Okay, thanks, Brad. Commissioners, any questions? Jim, you've got your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, just one question about the stream crossing. So it's an intermittent stream. Is the construction planned for when that stream is dry?
Yes, I mean that stream only flows when it rains. It's just basically drainage off of Main Street for the most part. So it's
Yeah, I mean, I
dry.
drive by it all the time, but I can never see down there. So I didn't know if it was flowing in the springtime or something.
I'm not sure. I haven't been out there in the spring, so.
Okay, I mean, I think a condition to only do that construction when it's dry might be something to consider.
That would be fine.
Okay, thanks, Jim.
Yep.
Are you all set?
Yes.
All right, Dennis Hubbard, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I noticed the erosion controls towards the south of the plot. If you scroll down, they're actually cut kind of horizontal across, right through the 25 no build. Is there any reason why we can't hug the 25 buffer and kind of curve that around instead of actually going through the buffer zone?
No, that wouldn't be a problem. That's a oversight on my part. I apologize for that. That's I could revise that plan fairly quickly. There's no reason. It was just a.
There's whatever, we should really stay out of there if we can.
Yeah, that's no problem. I actually believe that area is all mowed right now anyways. I believe this whole site's, they use it for hay. So. But yeah, it wouldn't be a problem.
Thank you.
Okay, any other commissioners have questions or comments? Yeah, Brad, go ahead.
So just to further touch on Dennis's comment, so I happen to notice the erosion control in the 25-foot in some areas, and I also looked at the tree line on the plan. So the tree line on the plan is a little misleading as well. I was looking for encroachments in that 25-foot or something the commission may not typically allow under the bylaw, but there isn't in this particular case. So it's already a meadow, it's already grass, it's staying that. So I was less concerned about it with it on the plan because what's there would likely be what's constructed anyways. But I do hear Dennis's concern there. So it was noted, but it's definitely a good idea to move it.
Okay, thanks, Brad. Any further comments or questions from the commission? Any comments or questions from general public? All right, so I think I heard 2 conditions and an open issue So application is not signed. So, I tend to agree with Brad that we shouldn't be issuing decisions until that's been done. I mean, technically the application isn't even complete yet. And then the two conditions that I think I heard was a condition that a wetland scientist review the installation of the culvert and specifically the material in the culvert, and then condition for the culvert to be installed when it's dry. Are those conditions okay, Mr. Hazen?
Yeah, those are fine by me.
Okay. So Brad, I feel like we shouldn't be closing the hearing or voting on an order of conditions until the application is complete. So I would be inclined that we would want to continue this until that's the case. Do you agree?
Yeah, that's up to the commission, I would think. To be quite honest, this was one of the first projects that came, if not the first, when I started in town. And my understanding is that a building permit was underway. It might have been issued. I don't remember exactly, but somebody from the planning department looked at it and didn't think there was a conservation issue there. It got a sign off, at least on the application. I don't recall if the building permit went out. And then when I arrived, the building inspector brought me on board and asked me to look at it, and that's when I noticed it needed to go in front of the commission. In the interim, the applicant has ordered a prefabbed house, my understanding is, and has been paying expenses waiting to be able to get this thing delivered and built. So I've been trying to, I wouldn't have normally accepted the application without the signature at that point, because I thought, in this particular case, with a little bit of a hardship going on, a signature shouldn't have been that big of a deal. But here we are still waiting for it. I also don't want to push it out many more weeks, for instance, if that's all we're waiting for as well. So my thought is to condition those two special conditions for the order of conditions itself, and simply make it an understanding tonight that decision's not going out the door until we have that property owner's signature, if that makes sense. Otherwise, I don't see the need to necessarily keep postponing this to our next agendas, if that's really the only thing we're waiting for at this point. Maybe the applicant's here tonight and can say, with certainty we'll be in the building tomorrow with that signature if need be. But I wouldn't want to push this out any longer if unnecessary.
I believe Alex Watson's on the call. He's the owner.
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah, I'd be happy to come down there tomorrow and sign it. I had no idea that it needed a signature still, so whatever time's good for you, I can be there tomorrow morning.
Okay, commissioners, is that good enough for you?
Good enough. Brad will be the gatekeeper.
Yep, it's good enough for me.
Yeah.
Right, I'd be happy to take a motion to close the hearing if there's no further comments or questions.
Motion to close the hearing.
Second.
All right, motion is made by Jim, seconded by Dennis to close the hearing. Any further discussion? Seeing none, this will be a roll call vote. Jim LaValle.
Aye.
Dennis Hubbard.
Aye.
Carl Fawcett.
Aye.
Dave Millette.
Aye.
Tom Seidenberg also votes aye. Happy to take a motion to issue the order of conditions.
Yep. Motion to issue the order of conditions contingent upon receiving the homeowner's signature and with the two aforementioned additional conditions.
Is there a second?
Yeah, I second it.
Right, motion's been made by Jim, seconded by Carl to issue the order of conditions with conditions. Any further discussion? This will be a roll call vote. Jim LaValle.
Aye.
Dennis Hubbard.
Aye.
Carl Fawcett.
Aye.
Dave Millette.
Aye.
And Tom Seidenberg also votes aye. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. Let's see. I do see Bill Hannigan's back on. Bill, Can you?
Able to talk.
All right, great. So let's go back to 10 Fire Road 54. Bill, want to bring us up to date?
Yeah. For the record, Bill Hannigan with Hannigan Engineering. At the last meeting, I asked the commission members that had not been on the site to come out and look and kind of just make sure we had a better understanding and make sure everyone agreed with what we are seeing on the ground as part of the notice of intent. At that time, we looked, Dennis came out along with Tom, and we looked around the site. There was, I guess, and I'll let Dennis speak for himself, but a change in heart of how he felt after looking at it and seeing what was out there. And then we also reviewed some areas around the clump of trees that we talked about at the last meeting. So at the end of the day, what we did was we had the chair and Dennis kind of figure out where they felt comfortable with the line. And I think that Jim would be on board with this. So I'll share my screen if I may. And the clump of trees that were being discussed in this area here was mainly the area that was being discussed. The pond is on this side. The driveway comes through this way. The vernal pool is in this location here. The existing building and structures are in this location here. So this is the area where we said there was an old foundation wooden shed of some sort that was in this area. It was relatively decayed. You know, you could see wood product there that was not, not natural, but clearly old and beyond its useful life. The blue lines here are the lines that we have pulled from the ORAD, and the red line is the line that we drew on the ground and then survey located while we're out there. So it appears that the understanding is that the areas that we're showing within the blue lines are understood as being previously developed, altered, disturbed, however you want to call it, and those areas have some protection. The chair felt this area was less, I guess, more in transition, and I'll let him speak to that himself than fully developed or fully wooded and natural. So it was in an in-between area, but felt that this was worth trying to save. So what we're looking at now is two pieces of the next steps on this. One, we're going to try to work our way around this area here, try to redevelop the site plan. This is kind of where we had the septic tanks. If you recall, we have to be more than 50 feet away from the vernal pool with the septic tank. So we really have some work to do trying to figure out where that can go. And we have a concept that I'll present in a minute. And the second part was relative to this existing driveway location and what should be our next steps on that. At one point, we had suggested bringing the driveway further away up in this area here to get away from the vernal pool and doing some restoration work in this area here. At the last meeting, it was brought up that may not be the best answer to disturb more upland area versus just rebuilding the driveway in its present location. In a previous site review, this area was flooded or overwhelmed with water during heavy rain periods. So, in talking with the agent, and I think some of the members who were out there would agree that raising this area in here makes sense for continued access to the property and to the new house once all the construction is done. So now we're looking at alternatives for what we would do in this area here. Raising the driveway in this location would in fact require a retaining wall to be built along this edge, which intuitively doesn't sound like the best way to promote habitat relative to the vernal pool by creating something that's going to block it. So what we did when we went out and located this red line here, we also had located these 3 trees, which were a lot of brush was in this area and small saplings, but there were 3 major trees in this area here, and then the same up in this area here, and there's one large tree, a 22-inch oak in this area here. And the concept while we're out there is, let's see if we can move the driveway up in this area and see if we can avoid hitting this tree here, and just shift the driveway over. That will allow us to do maybe a 3-to-1 slope up to the driveway, then the driveway itself, then kind of regrade and hopefully be inside these trees and try to not hit this one. But I'm going to let you know now that didn't happen that way. So those are the 2 points of focus that we're looking at: is how do we reposition what the Quills would like to build? How do we get the septic components and all the utilities to work in this area, leaving this area alone? And then the second piece would be, how do we then build the driveway to make this work? So what I did was I took a quick stab at that, and this is the building the way it's shown on the current plan, and we would basically just shimmy this up and slide this over a little bit, reorient the driveway, and pull things back a little bit to try to make it so that we still have access, but this might become more of a turnaround. And if you remember correctly, this is where the second building or the second garage was being placed. And then we would take the driveway and we would shift it approximately 10 feet to the, I think that's the east. And then from there, we would regrade this area here to allow us to get, the red would be the proposed driveway, and then the grading lines that are up in here would be the limit of what we would have to clear to try to get this to work. A low point would be developed in this area here, which I think that would be fine to be on its own. We also looked at moving the septic tank and pump chamber over to this location so that we wouldn't have to cut these trees. And that's another element that we have to do further investigation on to see if we can move that. But that would get the force main up in this area, so that would eliminate the disturbance that we had up in this area for the force main that came through the woods. We would now basically put into the new driveway location and get up to the septic system from that. And so this is where we're headed. One of the things that we think would be appropriate, Chuck Karen is on vacation this week, so he wasn't able to make it tonight, but I think it does make sense, as was brought up at the last meeting and during the site review, is to kind of take a look at what the value of the habitat in this area is based upon the vernal pool species. Chuck's taken a quick look at that. He's done a couple of site walks to review what his from his notes from when he was out there during the height of the vernal pool season, along with what things look like today. And if you recall, when we did the original review, Oxbow Associates worked as the town's consultant to peer review what we were doing on this. And I just think it makes sense to bring them back in to have Chuck come up with us come up with a plan, working with Chuck on how this should lay out, and then from there have Chuck work with his knowledge of the vernal pools and what the habitats are out there, and the benefit of doing this method versus one, building a retaining wall along this and leaving the driveway there, or two, clearing a whole bunch more vegetation, including large trees, where we could really just cut brush and move things around in this area here. We'd lose a tree in here, but this is all relatively low growth in this area here. So pull that whole package together, get that in, submit that to to Brad and then try to pull in Oxbow to review that so that by the time we get to the next meeting, we have some progress on the approach to the project and making sure that we're giving the commission what they need to rely on with their own peer reviewer. I think that's the most important part. So with that, I think that's what we're wanted to discuss tonight is to basically acknowledge the location that we're going to try to avoid. To look at the 2 or 3 driveway alternatives. One would be leaving it where it is. Second would be shifting it over a bit without, cutting down all of the large trees. And the third would be, which I think would not be particularly desirable, would be to swing the driveway around to get it even further away. So those would be that's where our focus is right now, is to try to get consensus from the commission on the next steps, and then we would respectfully request a continuance of this. Now, I'm actually going to be out of town for a few weeks, so I would like to. I can figure out what your dates are, but the second meeting in October is what I would be looking at for when we'd be coming back, and that's why by bringing in Oxbow and having Chuck and Oxbow work together on these elements, we can try to make some headway for the next meeting.
Okay, thanks, Bill. Dennis, you had your hand up for a while, but you took it down, so I think you're all set.
But no, I was just going to wait until Bill finished
okay.
his whole spiel. So, Bill, one of the things we had discussed while we were out there was, were you able to locate the septic of the existing house?
I have not been able to locate that. I actually have a call into the Board of Health, and I haven't received anything in specific back, but I know that I have another site that I'm discussing with him that I'll be talking with him tomorrow on, so I can bring this one up as well. I have talked to him in the meantime, and quite frankly, I mentioned to him a while ago, and then I forgot to bring it up to him when I talked to him last week.
Okay.
Jim, go ahead.
Yep, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Hannigan. One thing at the last meeting that Mr. Garner brought up that I thought would be kind of critical was the vernal pool species migratory routes. I think that would be something important to look at. So you gave us some options to do the driveway. I have no idea if any of those are correct.
Yeah, and that would be the purpose of having Chuck take a look at it from, Chuck Karen he's been doing this for many years as well. Have him basically review that, but then the town really should have their own consultant reviewing what Chuck's doing. And if Mr. Garner wants to put in input to that's part of the public meeting process, and that's fine. But we're not going to ask Mr. Garner to review our report. Okay, we're going to be talking with our consultant and with the town's consultant, and that's what we're going to rely on for direction. So I understand. Yeah. So I think that it's Brian Baxter's no longer there, but I believe there's someone named Scott that Chuck has made contact with already, just to kind of give him a heads up that we're going to want him to come back into this, but that has to come from the town.
Yeah, I'm saying these migratory routes might end up being a critical thing. And I'm not smart enough in that aspect to comment on that, but I think I know that we've told that to Chuck, and I don't know what the aspect of what he needs to do on that item, but I can make sure that he discusses that with Oxbow as they're reviewing it, and Brad will be involved in that as well, I presume. And my other comment, in some of the correspondence, there was so much to read, I can't remember where I read it, sorry. But there was a suggestion to categorize the areas as, if there's a lawn area, categorize it as lawn. If there's a landscaped area, so maybe label those on so we know how the area is exempted. That makes sense?
I'm not sure if I know exactly what you're saying, but I think that it's either part of the vernal pool definition or not. And I think that that's where we're at.
Well, under the exemption, there's lawn area, for example, there's landscaped area. And this is this whole area is not every part of it is the same.
Agreed.
Yeah. So if we could mark which area we're identifying as lawn, which area we're identifying as landscaped, for example.
You kind of
Yeah,
have that.
so Jim, that was kind of what we did at the site visit.
Okay.
So the shaded region shown on this plan is basically the line that I said that I thought that wasn't developed to me.
Right.
And so we drew that line during the site visit. And so that shaded region is basically the only region that we agreed was going to be accepted from, removed from the developed portion.
Yeah.
From the blue line.
Yeah.
And I think what Jim's asking is that, okay, like this is driveway, for example, okay, based upon the limits of the gravel that we located, this would be lawn area, okay, around here, and then this would be brush area, but somewhat developed. I think that's what you're asking, but it is kind of shown on the plans.
That is what I was asking, yes.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, it's really small for me to see it. Yeah. Yeah, Bill, I don't really see it. Like, what is lawn? Yeah.
Yeah, he doesn't have lawn called out. He's got the driveway called out. He's got the building called out. But
Right. So
I think that would be
right. So this is I know what you're saying. So I mean I could add some more notes to this. That's fun.
Yeah. I think it may behoove us to do that.
So Jim, just so I understand your clarification then, so are you considering that some of the other areas, not the one shaded here that we discussed at the site visit a few weeks ago, but some of the other areas you don't consider developed even though they're within the dashed blue line?
No, I'm just saying
Okay.
to make it clear that this part is lawn, this part was previously developed, this part was landscaped. Just so we're crystal clear.
Okay, thanks, Jim.
Yeah.
Was that it? Or do you have more comments?
No, I'm done. Yeah.
Okay.
So for example, this we would show as being brush, but it's if you walk out there and look at it, it's not clear lawn. And the other areas that we walked around, camp lawn, as you put it, Tom, that's camp lawn, and then this is brush, but still underlain with other stuff that's not natural, where this is more natural, and this was very clear when you get out there as being more natural. And I don't want to speak for you, but that's when we were out there. That's where I think even Dennis, I think you had looked at this area and said this area is clearly different from this area, and it's clearly different from even this area here. So I think I understand what Jim is asking for.
Jim, you're all set?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Mr. Garner?
Yeah, I wanted to respond to, I guess, Jim's comments. The migratory path that I had talked about before is obviously important because that tells the commission where these sort of age-old tribal-ways are for the wood frogs that they use the vernal pool. So that makes sense. at Oxbow, the individual that Bill referred to, Scott Smyers, he's very qualified. Oxbow does a lot of this sort of analysis. Chuck is also a good wetland scientist, so I think the general plan makes a lot of sense. The migratory analysis though can only take place during the breeding season, which is typically in late March, early April. So there's going to be a time factor, but the way that's typically done is that it's called a drift net survey. It's fairly common. The entire vernal pool is surrounded by this drift net, and the species are able to be logged as they bump into the fence, and it takes daily monitoring. It's usually about a 2-week process, but it's very authoritative in terms of where the species travel and where they have traveled. So that's an important element. I was going to say we've lost the plan, but in the area the Bill was talking about raising possibly the driveway, it's possible that through that whole section, because it's fairly steep to the right or to the east, that the species don't use that area at all when they travel. They may come in from the north. So it seems to me, without knowing where they typically access the pool, it's a little premature to be talking about where to relocate the driveway if that ends up being the case. But the general plan, I think, makes sense. It's just a matter of timing and implementation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Garner. Jim, you still have your hand up, but I think you're.
I did. I'm sorry. I'll lower it.
Okay, so I guess I have a couple of comments on the plan. Well, a couple of observations. So, if I just take that as if that was the plan in front of us today at the official plan. A couple of my observations would be, so the house is almost entirely within the WPA 100-foot buffer to the pond. So to make that approvable, we would need to understand that has no negative effect on the pond. Additionally, putting the structure so close to some of the resource areas, and in particular so close to those trees, almost necessarily means that those trees are going to be taken down. If you're putting a structure a few feet from a tree, you're obviously cutting half of that tree's roots out. Furthermore, if the structure is so close to those trees, I mean, you're obviously going to be wanting to walk around the house, so there's obviously going to be lawn. Those are things that are going to be concerning. You're going to need a limit of work, be able to get machines around. So I would want to understand how all that is feasible before I'd be happy with the plan. And then, so there's some questions about the driveway. Moving the driveway, since that is vernal pool resource area on either side of the driveway, we would need to understand how replication and how that works, understand in the plan how the lost habitat area is replaced. So those are the things that you should be thinking about to make this an approvable plan. So I know that's just a sketch, but those are the things that jumped out to me. So if I'm going to vote for that plan, I need to understand and have pretty good answers to those questions. And, that's just for starters.
And quite frankly, Mr. Chair, that's the direction we were hoping for. So we appreciate that. And I think that we've tied up this commission's meetings enough over the past few meetings. And I know you have a lot on your agenda tonight. So with that, we'd request a continuance to the second meeting in October. And we would like the commission to discuss bringing in Oxbow, and I know that there's something that we have to do relative to providing funding for that. So that whole process, if we could clarify that process tonight as well, that would be great.
Okay, sure. I see two hands. I'm going to go to Attorney Roloffs first. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I did want to just provide some comments on what I thought the focus of this meeting was going to be, and that's the extent of the areas that the commission is considering to be exempt from the definition of vernal pool resource area. So there was some discussion on that. If I can share my screen quickly, I just want to
Sure, go ahead.
So I was really surprised. I wasn't able to attend the last meeting, but I was really surprised that at the last meeting, the commission seemed to completely sort of reverse its views as to whether or not these areas around the house would qualify for the exemption from the vernal pool resource area. You saw an email from me summarizing some of my previous comments. You also got a letter from Attorney Bowen, my client. And included with his letter were some additional photos supplementing those that he had previously provided, which I think are pretty compelling. And there was no discussion of these yet this evening. But basically what he shows through the photos and his letter is that there's a huge difference between the condition of this property historically, as he described it in his previous letters and is shown here, and the current condition. So it seems to me that the commission is basing its exemption evaluation on current conditions, not the conditions that existed when the bylaw was adopted, which I think is the relevant point in time, or even the conditions that have existed more generally historically here. What you're doing is, it sounds like, if you're exempting all the areas that you've discussed tonight, is you're giving the owner credit for sort of the maintenance and clearing activities that it conducted since owning this property 3 seasons ago. So they've controlled this property for 3 growing seasons. And you can tell from these photos that the conditions now, which is the photo I'm showing at the bottom, are significantly different than those that existed prior to their purchase of the property. So the photo at the top shows the state of this property, viewing the house from sort of the path from the water back towards the house. And as Mr. Bowen had explained, these areas weren't maintained with a tight lawnmower, frequent mowing. There was no grass growing there other than what was naturally existing in the woods here. It was a naturally vegetated area that was infrequently cut to enable the walking from the house down to the pond. It's not a lawn. It's not even a camp lawn. I'm not sure what that is, but it's certainly not a lawn or a landscaped area as those terms are commonly understood. This is a picture from the house towards the pond before the applicants purchased it. Again, showing the natural vegetation that existed there, although cut or pruned to allow one to walk down to the pond, versus the after condition, which is probably the condition that you saw when you went out there more recently. I think probably during the last few site visits to the property. So the significant point there that you need to be thinking about is, what date should we be evaluating this question on? And is it the date prior to the filing with the commission, or is it when the bylaw was adopted? In our view, I feel pretty strongly that what the bylaw attempted to protect were the lawns, landscaped areas, and developed areas that existed at the time that the bylaw was adopted. If you take the position that you're going to look at current conditions as they exist at the time a filing is submitted to you, think about the precedent that that's going to set. I mean, you're going to be essentially motivating people to aggressively maintain their properties, if not affirmatively establish lawn, et cetera, in areas that they want to get the benefit of an exemption from before they have their surveyor come out to the property, before they file with the commission, et cetera. We just don't think that's how the bylaw was intended to be interpreted, and we think it's a dangerous precedent. The best evidence of the condition of the property in 2007, which we think is the relevant time period, is the information that Mr. Bowen submitted. In one of his earlier letters, he also submitted this photograph. So this is looking at the other side of the house from the driveway location. This was a photo, I think, that was taken from the listing of the property just before the current applicants bought it. And you can see, again, natural vegetation surrounding the house. In our view, the only areas of this property that were historically, that would qualify historically as an exempt area are the existing structure and the driveway. And those would fall into the category of developed areas. They're not lawns, obviously, landscaped or gardens. They're developed areas. And that's the extent of it. Now, turning to the driveway question, which is important. We talked about this quickly before, but I want to focus in on it now that there was some focus on it this evening. So this is an annotated version of the site plan. And what you see here in red are the areas that we believe are an more accurate estimation of the actual driveway that served this house historically. The blue area on this plan is not a driveway. It may be that there's some scattering of gravel over here nearest to the house, but that was never used as a driveway. This area to the right, you can see the reference here to the large tree. Again, that was never historically used as a driveway, and it's not a driveway now. I mean, so how do you define a driveway? Notably, in October of 22, when the site survey was done, the surveyors also didn't view this area over here as a driveway. On that plan from 2022, they shaded what they viewed as the driveway, and it's this area that runs up through the middle of the area that they actually labeled gravel driveway. They didn't label this area over here with the large tree as part of the driveway. They did label the area left of the house as driveway. We disagree with that. We think that that's not accurate for the reasons we've mentioned. It wasn't until the vernal pool was identified that they understood that expanding what they considered to be a driveway might be of significance to them. So when they came in with the later in the ORAD process and coming in to the NOI process, for the first time, they started to label this larger area as a driveway, an area that includes these large oak trees. We just think that's not accurate. It's inconsistent with the historical evidence that's been provided by Mr. Bowen. And they haven't submitted any evidence, by the way. I know it's difficult to establish conditions back 17 years, but you do have some pretty good information as to what those conditions are from Mr. Bowen. You have nothing from the applicant that even attempts to characterize the historic condition of the property. They are relying exclusively on the current conditions that they've established more recently. Now, again, Mr. Bowen has provided this figure here shows in the hatched green areas, the areas that are shown in the photographs that I just showed to you, that Mr. Bowen submitted to you. And what those photographs demonstrate is that these areas were naturally vegetated areas, and they're not driveway or lawn or landscaping. That's photographic evidence that you have, the best evidence available as to the historic conditions of these properties. These should not be considered developed areas or exempt from the vernal pool resource area. So in summary, we think the areas to be treated as exempt from the vernal pool resource area are only the areas in red here, not the areas in blue. And this area over here to the right, it's not a driveway. It might be cleared currently of natural vegetation, but historically that wasn't the case. So I did submit an email that hit some of the key points that I had previously discussed further in more detail in my March 25th letter. And I'm hoping that you've all had the chance to look at that. I just want to mention a couple of those while we're focused on this issue here. Number one, this bylaw is obviously written to be more protective of these areas than the state act. It's stated over and over again in the bylaw, and there's actually a provision that tells you that when you're interpreting the bylaw, you should be interpreting it to accomplish that objective, which is to interpret it in a way that renders it more protective of these areas than the state act. Number two, the words and the terms used in the bylaw in the definition of vernal pool resource area have significance. They specifically exempted lawns, gardens, landscaped areas, and developed areas. It's not fair to accept the applicant's use of other words and to just blend all these things together. A developed area, especially in the context of the wetlands regulations, and I go through how that term is used in different provisions within the wetland program, including previously developed areas within the riverfront area under the state act. The term developed is different than just being disturbed. An area that's been pruned or cleared infrequently, but allowed to renaturalize, those are not developed areas. They provide important wetland functions, and there's a real difference between the word area of disturbance or a disturbed area and a developed area. Number two, I had suggested, and it was discussed this evening, that you go through the exercise of actually rendering findings as to which areas constitute lawn, garden, landscaped area, and developed. And the reason is other applicants want to know what you consider to be a lawn. You know, is this a lawn? Is this a lawn? Like, if that's a lawn, you're going to have a lot of lawns along this pond, and you're going to have a lot of lawns along, not only along this pond, but in other areas of Lancaster. I actually don't think this is a lawn either, as it was historically maintained. It appears that they've actually seeded it. I don't know that. But historically, this area, even if it was cut at one point or a couple points in the summer down to that level, it was allowed to regenerate. It was a natural area that was infrequently pruned or cut. That's not a lawn, and it's not a landscaped area. And then I'll just make the final point that, again, think about the precedent that you're setting here. And especially a decision to make the base your evaluation as to this exemption, the timing of that evaluation. And is it right to base it on the conditions that are currently in place, you know, many months after a filing came into you, or even at the time of the filing? Or should you be looking back to evidence of the conditions as they existed historically when the bylaw was adopted, particularly where you actually have that evidence? And then, I'm sorry, I'm just about to wrap up here. I just want to point out one thing. So the focus of these discussions has been on the exemption within the vernal pool resource area definition. I just want to be clear, there's been no discussion that I've heard of related to the different exemption under the bylaw section 2015-5, 5A in particular. I discussed that in my March 25th letter. These exemptions are different. They both have references to lawn landscaping, lawns, gardens, and landscaped and developed areas, but the other exemption is different. So I just want you to be focused in on that difference and don't inadvertently treat the two as if they're the same, or come to a conclusion that just because you're finding something exempt from the vernal pool definition, that it somehow is also exempt from the bylaw more generally under that other provision. And then finally, with respect to the project changes that were discussed tonight, we obviously had no knowledge of these. You know, we're going to have substantive feedback on that. I'm sure Pat Garner is going to have a lot related to that. Mr. Chairman, you pointed out some information that you're going to be interested in seeing. I just wanted to mention that Pat Garner did submit a letter dated March 19th. So as you get to the point of actually evaluating the project and the impacts of the project on the buffer zone and the wetland resource areas, et cetera, he had outlined in his letter a lot of the information that you should be asking the applicant to compile. Some of it is the information you outlined this evening, and some of it is additional information. For example, clearer information as to which trees would be taken down, et cetera. So I'd urge you to go back to Pat's letter of March 19. So with that, I think that Pat Gardner might have some additional comments, but I'm not sure. But that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Jim, you had your hand up for a bit. I don't know if you...
Yeah. So thank you. The only thing I wanted to say was that, if we exempt an area, say we call that lawn and we say it's exempt, to me, that doesn't mean that the applicant can do whatever they want in that exempt area, because there could still be an impact to the resource area. And what I'm really keen on is cumulative impact to multiple resource areas in this project. So Bill, that's sort of directed at you. And that's all I wanted to say.
So Jim, I have to say I disagree with you on that point, that if the commission, as a finding of fact, says that a particular area on this plan is exempt from either the bylaw or the vernal pool, it's exempt. It is exempt from regulation in that aspect. And I don't think that we don't have pre-construction review authority over changes made outside of our jurisdiction. If we decide that it's exempt, it's outside of our jurisdiction. That's kind of how I view it. I think maybe you might view it a different way. Under the WPA, unless there's a clear showing, we wouldn't be able to say something 101 feet away from a resource area is clearly going to damage a resource area. We're not allowed to say that. We're not allowed to rule on that in a pre-construction review. If it turns out that, yes, in fact, we were right, we could then, issue an enforcement order and take up action. But the state has made it very clear under the WPA, our jurisdiction ends at 100 feet. If we say under the bylaw that these areas are exempt, the only thing they're regulated under is the WPA, and these areas are not regulated under the WPA because they're outside. The vernal pool is not regulated under the WPA. We only have the buffer zone to the pond under the WPA.
Right.
So, that's why when I was making my comments about the trees in particular and the structure being so close. Clearly, if you put a structure 3 feet from the trees are dead, whether you cut them down that moment or you cut them down 3 years later when they actually die, because you'll be back in front of us 3 years from now saying, hey, I have a dead tree I'd like to cut down. And we've always said, sure, go ahead and cut down the tree, right? So
I hear what you're saying. I hear what you're saying. I'm just not sure it's so black and white for me.
Okay. That's fair. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I guess I would have a couple of comments to Attorney Roloff's. I appreciate you raising those issues again. It's true we didn't discuss the most recent comment letter, and we probably should have. I have one ask. Those pictures are not necessarily dated or not clearly dated in those letters. If you can provide us the originals, I think that would be helpful. I think you raised some good points. If that vegetation clearing occurred after the purchase of the property, and I think you've made that point in the past, and I tend to overlook it when we're focused on the very detailed, the details that we've been looking at over the last couple of months and the site visits. Honestly, I do find that kind of persuasive. Looking at that site, all of the undergrowth, it sure is hard to call that developed. However, the problem I have personally is, when I was a teenager, I was responsible for mowing the lawn at my parents' house, and I hated that job. And so I didn't do it as frequently as my parents would like, and so it would get overgrown. And as I understand it, this property was left. I won't call it abandoned, but there was nobody there for a while, and so it could have gotten wild. So my problem with saying it looked like this 2 years ago, but I don't know what it looked like 5 years ago, and I don't know what it looked like a decade ago. So I see those pictures, and I'm like, yes, that sure does look like wild, undeveloped land. I don't know if that was just because nobody was there. And so I think if you provide us timestamps for the original pictures, we can look at the metadata, clearly date those pictures. I might very well find that quite persuasive. So,
Can I respond to that, Mr. Chairman?
Sure, I have a lot of hands. Go ahead.
Okay, so I'll see what I can do about that. I'm not sure sort of whether these photos were dated or not, but we'll look into that and see if we can pin that down. But let me just remind you that you do have testimony from John Bowen that these photos depict, sort of a typical condition of this property for the 40-something years that he lived there. It wasn't just a moment in time that we happened to get lucky and find a photo that showed this area is vegetated. And Mr. Bowen has testified. He's an attorney that, for some reason that I don't understand, you don't seem to want to, grant him any credibility. But he is the only person who's attempted to characterize the condition of this property prior to the current applicant buying it and aggressively maintaining it. I'll put it that way, right? So he's telling you, from having seen this property over the course of 40 plus years, that these photos he's provided to you are more representative of the normal conditions out there historically. The applicants, now, some of your comments concern me because you're kind of suggesting that you're not only attempting to interpret the scope of the vernal pool exemption, but that you might actually be also discussing the exemption under 2015 5A. And if those two are different, and I discussed the difference in my March 25th letter, I'm sure you don't want me to belabor it here, but those exemptions are different. If the finding of the commission is that these are exempt, not only from the vernal pool resource area, but they're just exempt generally from the bylaw, that's really important for the other commission members to know for the reason you just mentioned, which is if the commission determines that, the commission cannot apply the bylaw requirements over those areas, which is crazy because it's so clearly the intent of the town when it adopted this bylaw to regulate activities in these types of areas that are not only the vernal pool areas, but also buffer zone areas that the town wants to protect because they're important buffer zone areas. So all commission members should be aware that if your proposal is to exempt these areas under both of those provisions, which is not what we were talking about earlier tonight, but if that's what you're suggesting or asking them to make a decision on, there's significance there. That broader exemption also doesn't apply just to areas. There's an element of whether or not what's being proposed in these areas qualify for the exemption. Not all activities within these areas are completely exempt from the bylaw. And I discussed that point in my March 25th letter. So if you're listening to this and you're wondering about these distinctions, I would just urge the commission to go back to my letter and review it. Coming in and changing a lawn, exchanging a lawn area with a building is not an exempt activity. modifying a lawn might be exempt, but completely replacing it with something different that doesn't provide similar functions is not exempt. And that's something I discussed in my letter. It's separate from the vernal pool resource area exemption analysis. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Attorney Roloff. Attorney Nyland?
Thank you. We had this discussion several months ago, so I feel like I'm going to be repeating myself. But the one thing that Attorney Roloff and I agree on is that there are two separate and distinct exemptions under the bylaw, and the terms of those two provisions are very important. The reason they're very important is they use entirely different language under the general exemption, which we have never claimed, and the bylaw exemption, which is what we have been dealing with. The general exemption, which takes you back to the history, and no one is discrediting Attorney Bowen's review of what took place over history. It says the alteration, this is 2155A, which we have not asked for any relief from, says the alteration, this is an exemption for the alteration of any residential, business, or institutional building or customary appurtenance thereto, such as lawns, gardens, landscaped, and other developed areas where such structure or appurtenance existed prior to the effective date of this bylaw shall not be subject to the bylaw. So if one is looking for an exemption under that provision, you have to demonstrate that the activity was in existence at the time of the bylaw in 2007 and remains. And so Mr. Roloff and I, we agree that is one specific exemption. However, the vernal pool exemption is different, and it was written at the same time. And there are lots of rules of statutory construction, but what you do is you look at the actual terms of the language. So let's take a look at what the vernal pool exemption says. It says the boundary of the resource area for vernal pools shall be 100 feet outward from the mean annual high water line, defining the depression, but shall not include existing lawns, gardens, landscaped, or developed areas. It doesn't say those that existed prior to the effective date of this bylaw for a very specific reason. It is regulating the vernal pools differently than those other general activities. If they intended, as Attorney Roloff suggests, that we should be looking at the vernal pool as it was in 2007 in that area, then guess what? That's what the bylaw would have said, because in one section above, that's exactly what it said, that for the general exemption, it had to exist prior to the effective date and still exist. But guess what? That language is not in here. So one of the rules of statutory construction is indeed you look at what the terms are, and they're entirely different. My letter to you dated June 5th, 2024, went through Attorney Roloff's argument. We actually argued it at one of the meetings, and I presented to you that we see that it is different and that we weren't seeking the 2007 exemption. We're looking at the vernal pool. Now, that was also buttressed when you asked Oxbow to come in and take a look at the vernal pool through the ANRAD process. And in the ANRAD process, they included the entire resource area as it's defined in the bylaw, and included some areas which we believed at the time were developed, disturbed, or not natural. And then ultimately, when we, and those were included in the ORAD, it was circled, it was included developed areas as well as the vernal pool habitat itself. And when we came back this year, we agreed, well, let's look at what those actual disturbances were. Even though Oxbow agreed that it's the whole area, let's go back. And that's what we've been doing, is we've looked at those areas that have been, on the existing basis, either lawns, gardens, landscaped, or developed areas. You heard Bill Hannigan talk about areas that they looked at underneath the brush, where the lawn is, that those are not natural areas. So we feel very comfortable with the areas that have identified, and and given the chair and others' concern with the grove of trees that is natural, and that's why we're now designing around it. But to suggest that you have to go back to 2007 with respect to the vernal pool habitat exemption it's not supported by the language of the bylaw. The second point that council made, well, this isn't developed area because developed is defined differently in the Wetlands Protection Act for riverfront and for other areas. Well, the other rule is when something's not defined and developed's not defined, what you do is you look at context. And to use the riverfront area and other provisions in the Wetlands Act to look at the vernal pool exemption is not correct, because the riverfront area and the stormwater provisions have entirely different agendas when they're looking at whether something is developed than we have for this vernal pool. And so it's not appropriate to try to drag in other definitions of developed when what we're looking at is something that's not natural. We know what it is. We know what's not natural out there, and it's been identified. And I appreciate we've been going for a while, but I think the third comment with respect to, we haven't submitted any information in order for the commission to make a finding with respect to having no adverse effect from the project upon the interests of the act. I think that's fair, but we've never intended to do that until we have an agreement as to where we should be looking at developing the area. Once we do that, we agree with the chair that our job is to make sure that we meet the provisions of the bylaw and the Wetlands Act, that we have to ensure that the interests are protected. But we haven't done that yet, and we haven't professed that we've done that yet. So we appreciate Oxbow, we appreciate Mr. Garner and others, and more importantly, the commission. And once we have an idea of where we can put things, that's when we're going to come back with a notice of intent intended to meet both the Wetlands Act as well as the bylaw. But the most important thing I want you to leave with is, when as Mr. Roloff's led off with, he said the important point is, what's the time period? And the time period for the vernal pool review is 2024. It's not 2007. The time period for the first exemption, which we're not claiming, is 2007. It's not 2024.
So
thank you.
Thank you for your comments. So one question I don't think anyone on the commission has actually asked, which I think the abutters would like us to ask, and so I'm going to ask, what was the condition of the property when the applicant acquired it?
Well, I can't. I came on afterwards. So somebody else is going to have to answer that question in terms of what existing means.
So Mr. Bowen represents that one of those pictures is essentially the state of the property when the applicants acquired it. Is that the state of the property when the applicants acquired it?
Well, I think you asked the right question in terms of having the time, Mr. Chairman. So I think that's what we need to find, is what those pictures are. But I think that that pictures doesn't, as you indicate yourself, and I think we all as kids mowed lawns and didn't mow lawns, whether or not that's unnatural below that area is a question of fact that that we'll have to do some more inquiry on and support. But it doesn't mean just because there's a picture that isn't a unnatural area below those areas that are shown on the pictures.
Honestly, I don't find that very persuasive.
Well, no, look, when Mr. Hannigan went out and looked at the brush areas, even though there was brush there, it was fairly clear that there was an unnatural area below that brush. All I'm suggesting is you have a set of pictures. We have to make further inquiry to determine whether or not that was a natural area below. And I'm saying to you that I can't give you that testimony because I don't have that experience or understanding, but others should be able to. That's why I'm asking the commission to consider that that's an open question. You have a piece you have pictures that have been presented that don't have dates on them, a representation as to when they were taken. But I think it would also be because we haven't had an opportunity to respond to that. And so I think that's what we would do at the next meeting, is have a chance to take a look at those pictures, see what the dates are, and then be able to respond to you to answer that question.
I would appreciate a response. Yeah, I think that's an important question, because I think Attorney Roloff is raising some good points that in the avalanche of documents I appear to have overlooked. Yeah, we'll just leave it at that. I consider that an open question. Bill Hannigan, you've got your hand up. Go ahead.
Yes. In light of, or in the same guise of the discussion about the photographs, I think one of the important things is the photographs that were taken, and I'm not sure who exactly said it, but one of the photographs looked to me like the place was overgrown and abandoned, and that doesn't necessarily mean that that's how it was maintained prior to whoever was living in the house either moving out or passing away or whatever happened before the house went on the market. So pictures that, I mean, if I don't mow my lawn for a few weeks, my lawn looks much worse than my neighbor's. So does that mean that I'm a derelict neighbor in my neighborhood by not maintaining my lawn? I do think that there are. I think it would be interesting to find out how those pictures, the before pictures, line up with the listing that was. Because I'm suspicious that that's where they may have come from. Is that might have been on the listing or from, and maybe Mr. Bowen took pictures at that point in time. I don't know, but I think that just because something's not maintained recently doesn't mean. Now, if it was like that from 2010 till today, then obviously the growth that would have been in that area in the understory would have had significant. They wouldn't just be.
So Bill, I'm sorry.
Saplings, but
Bill, I'm sorry to interrupt, but yeah, we've probably spent too long on this topic again. I mean, we spent an hour and a half 2 months ago on this exact same topic. So I see both Dennis and Attorney Roloffs have their hands up. Gentlemen, if you could be quick. I'll start with Dennis. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say some of the areas we're talking about is where we also think the septic could be. So I think being able to map out from the Board of Health where the septic is going to go a long way. We have made some assumptions that was over there, but that could go one way or the other to prove the case.
Okay. Very good point. Thanks, Dennis, for reminding me that. And Attorney Roloffs.
Yeah, just quickly, I can confirm that these more recently submitted photos, not the one that Mr. Bowen submitted in March, but the photos submitted viewing the house from the pond and then looking back from the house towards the pond were taken prior to acquisition at a time when the house was actually occupied. I'm going to try to get you better details as to the date, but I just wanted to confirm that point, that those photos were taken during a period of occupancy. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think we have an understanding of the issues and the open questions. I think I'd like to move forward with the continuance. I believe there has been a request to continue to our second meeting of October. That's October 22nd, if I'm not mistaken. Let me just check that again. October 4th Tuesday is October 22nd. Is that acceptable, Mr. Hannigan?
yes,
That's what he asked.
Yeah.
Okay.
I said yes 3 times before I clicked up.
Okay. Can I have a motion to continue?
Yes, motion to continue to October 22nd.
Second.
Motion's made by Jim, seconded by Dennis to continue to October 22nd. Any further discussion? Seeing none, this will be a roll call vote. Jim LaValle,
Aye.
Dennis Hubbard,
Aye. Sorry, gotta get off mute.
Carl Fawcett,
Aye.
and David Millett.
Aye.
Tom Seidenberg also votes aye. Okay.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
everyone.
Thank you.
Moving on. Let's see here. We have. We did that already. I think the next item on the agenda is continued request for amended order of conditions 314 Fort Pond Road. I see Ryan Proctor on the line. I think you're here for this project, Ryan.
I am. I'm joined by Elena Pascarella of Landscape Elements as well.
Great. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Want to bring us up to date?
Certainly. So thank you for your time tonight. For the record, I'm Ryan Proctor with Dillis and Roy Civil Design Group. I'm representing Terry Goss and Bonnie Day, the owners of the property. As I mentioned, Elena Pascarella from Landscape Elements is with us tonight as well. About a month and a half ago, at your second meeting in July, Elena had presented some field modifications originally as a request for a red line change. At that meeting, there were some questions from the commission, and the commission generally felt that the modifications that we're proposing rose to the level of a request for an amended order of conditions and requested that we file them as such. So subsequent to that meeting, I submitted to your office a revised site plan from my office, a revised landscape plan from Landscape Elements, and then a cover letter summarizing those changes. So if you permit me to do so, I'd like to share my screen and I can just go over those items.
Please do.
Great, thank you very much. So a lot of these items were discussed at the previous meeting. There were 5 items in total. The first of which is along the shoreline adjacent to the existing dock. There are currently some timber steps that provide access from the upper portion of the patio and the house level down to the water and to that existing dock. The previous iteration of the plan that was presented in July originally had a forked configuration that would split down to a lower landing level, and then the other fork would go to the existing dock to the north. We have since revised that to have just a single fieldstone walkway providing access down to the dock. The reason for doing so is to minimize the work within the 25-foot no build zone, no disturb zone. And secondly, we are proposing to remove that platform adjacent to the dock so that basically we would just be providing access to the larger dock. So we'd be removing that landing area, restoring that to match the existing shoreline characteristics, and then just providing access just down to that dock. Again, within the 25-foot, I believe this was mentioned at the last meeting, we are proposing to remove a single 18-inch maple tree that appears to be in declining health. I think some photographs were presented at that meeting. You can see the upper level of the canopy is declining. The native vegetation around the foot of the tree would remain and be supplemented with plantings that were proposed on the landscape plan that Elena had prepared. The fourth item is up within the previously approved limit of work adjacent to the end of the driveway. They are currently ongoing with construction at the site, and there were some grading challenges at the end of the driveway and where this deck provided access to this lower flagstone paver walkway and an outdoor kitchen area. So what they did is Elena and her team provided some modifications, some updated spot grades, and then provided a lower retaining wall just to take the curse off of some of that grading from the driveway into that lower patio level. And then finally, the previously approved plan had a stone recharge trench at the terminus of the driveway. Instead of doing the stone recharge trench, we're proposing a trench drain just along the last little section of the driveway, and that would be discharged outside of the 100-foot buffer zone with a little boulder head wall, and that would work its way back towards all the native vegetation that we're proposing. This trench drain is really just capturing this last little portion of driveway. The driveway is super elevated so that it runs off naturally into the existing vegetation along the driveway under existing conditions and proposed conditions. Those, I believe, are all the changes that I'd summarize in my letter. If there are any questions for me on this plan or anything relative to the landscaping, we'd be happy to take them.
All right, thank you. Brad, do you have comments?
I'm all set.
Okay, thanks, Brad. Commissioners, any questions or comments? Not seeing any. So I guess my only question, the existing platform, what's under there today at the bank?
I believe I have a picture. It's sort of a sandy, oh, forgive me, too many tabs open. Say like a grass lawn with some, it's very sandy right along the shoreline, and then there's some native vegetation. You can see this is, I think, a good example of what's there currently and from where the picture is taken as well.
Okay, and the what you're proposing to replace the bank with, that's what the rest of the bank currently is, or was that approved under the previous order?
We are proposing to restore it with what's there to match what's there currently, and then just upgrading of that, we have some native vegetation on the landscape plan.
Okay. Thank you. Any further questions or comments, commissioners or Brad? Any questions or comments from the general public? So I'm assuming, Brad, since you didn't have any comments, you're fine with the commission approving this as an amended order of conditions?
Right, I'm fine. I know one of the questions that we had at the last meeting was the platform, and that was on the plan to be removed.
Okay. So commissioners, if there's no further questions or comments, I'd be happy to take motions to close the hearing and issue the amended.
Sure, motion to close the hearing.
I'll second.
Right. Motion's been made by Jim, seconded by Dennis to close the hearing. Any further discussion? This will be a roll call vote. Jim LaValle.
Aye.
Dennis Hubbard.
Aye.
Carl Fawcett.
Aye.
David Millette.
Aye.
And Tom Seidenberg also votes aye. And issue the amended.
Yeah, motion to issue the amended order of conditions for 314 Fort Pond Road.
Second.
All right, motion's been made by Jim, seconded by Dennis to issue the amended order of conditions. Any further discussion? Seeing none, roll call vote. Jim LaValle.
Aye.
I'm sorry, Jim, did you?
Aye. Yes.
Okay. Dennis Hubbard.
Aye.
Carl Fawcett.
Aye.
Dave Millette.
Aye.
And Tom Seidenberg also votes aye. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, next up on the agenda, we have a request for determination of applicability for removal of dead trees within Seven Bridge Road right-of-way. Let me read that into the record. Do I have the right? I do. Town of Lancaster Conservation Commission, notice of public hearing, September 10th, 2024. Pursuant to Mass General Laws, Chapter 131, Section 40, the Wetlands Protection Act, and Lancaster Wetlands Protection Bylaw, the Town of Lancaster Conservation Commission will hold a public hearing via Zoom on Tuesday, September 10th, 2024 at 7 p.m. to hear and act upon the following matter. A request for determination of applicability filed by Town of Lancaster Department of Public Works for the removal of approximately 40 standing trees within Seven Bridge Road right-of-way, Route 117, from approximately 1/2 mile west of Bolton to the Bolton town line. A copy of the application and accompanying documents are on file in the Office of Community Development and Planning, 701 Main Street, Lancaster, Mass. 978-365-3326. Okay, Brad, can you tell us about this project? I don't see anyone
Sure.
else from the town.
No, it's just me. Actually, the DPW director has been working on this application, working with me on that. And I gave him a couple of quick comments and some options about additional details that the commission might want to see. But I also wanted to hear some feedback from the commission tonight. And just to let you know up front, we fully anticipate that we'll be asking for a continuance on this on behalf of the town, and discussing it in more detail at the next meeting. But it's a little atypical from the normal tree removal project because there's not a lot of reference points. It's a long stretch of road, and you know, like you typically have with a residential homeowner that wants to remove some trees, I would advise them to take some photos. You can kind of see where they are in relation to structures, other monuments on the property, that kind of thing. There's about 40 trees here that are dead. I have looked at them. I drove up and down the road with the DPW director. They are immediately adjacent to the shoulder, so you're talking just a few feet from the pavement. Um, if anything, on the edge of the BVW, I don't really see maybe one or two that might just be in the wetland, but for the most part, it's in the upland on the higher part before the wetland slopes down. So I can show quickly just to show you the vicinity that we're looking at so that everybody understands. Just give me 1 second. Okay. So this is the JIT. Can everyone see that okay?
Yep.
So this is the town's GIS system here. And it's Seven Bridge Road there. So we've got Harvard Road, Neck Road up in this area, and then the town line right in through here. So really the section that we're looking at is just before the town line to probably, I want to say a little bit west of the Nashua. And is quite a bit of trees there. Some of them look pretty hazardous. And nothing really looks to me in terms of healthy that we discussed that should come down. One of the concerns the director and I, and the director also wearing the dual hat as the tree warden in town too. It is a great area, not just for resource areas, but the canopy itself driving that stretch as well. So we took a pretty good look up and down, even knowing that they're dead, just to see how that might really affect the canopy that's there or other important features that people driving up and down the road would like as well. I don't see much of an impact there as well. I don't know if they're going to have hearings regarding the tree removal separate from the Conservation Commission. My understanding is for hazardous trees, they don't have to, but I kind of thought that they may anyway. But in any event, the suggestions I gave as possible more detail on this would be to, flag the trees, take photos, possibly locate them with GIS equipment, which I don't even think that we have in town, but I'm not 100% sure on that. Or to even just take a GIS printout and mark up with a good estimate of where those trees are, depending on what the commission may want for detail. I would also suggest if you have some time between now and the next meeting as well, just to drive back and forth once just to see what's there, or even go on to the street view on this GIS as well. You can actually see a number of the dead ones just as you're panning along the street just from the GIS. And again, they're all really immediately on either side of the pavement. They are within the right of way, which tells you just how close they are to the pavement. If they weren't within the right of way, then they would be, the property owner's responsibility beyond that, and not the town's too. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer what I can. And if you want to give us some more direction in terms of what you may be looking for from the town, then I can, ask that we have the DPW provide that for the next meeting too.
So Brad, for my part, I don't need GIS coordinates for the trees.
Thank you.
I think we're happy to let residents provide us a sketch with tree locations and pictures. I'm happy to take a marked up sketch where the trees are, and some pictures. I think that's fine. You said you've already seen them and you agree that they need to be taken down. So I'd be even happy to not necessarily require the pictures. I guess the other thing I would say is if there's an immediate danger with these trees, would it be approvable under emergency order? I don't think that we need to do that, but certainly if the DPW feels that some of them have to go and have to go now, I think that would be an appropriate path. Jim, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, thanks. And thank you, Brad. So how many trees in total, Brad? You said, but I didn't write it down.
Approximately 40.
40? Okay.
Right.
So that's quite a few. So it probably would be wise to fill out the tree removal form that we have, especially since there's so many. Have you seen it? It is on the website.
I think I've seen it.
Yeah. It's the species, the diameter, the distance from a resource area, that sort of thing. And the other thing, you touched upon it. So that Seven Bridge Road tree canopy that goes across Route 117, that's like a beloved part of the town scenic road, right? So what would the impact be to that canopy? You touched upon it.
So in general, so that there isn't really a clump of 10, 8, or even 5 trees together that need to come down. They're kind of sporadic as you move along that stretch. So that was, I had the same thoughts. Like I've driven up and down that road many times before, and that's one of the things that I appreciate that. And I was concerned that should this go forward without a real strong need, what's that going to look like? But fortunately, I don't think that there's going to be too much of or really any detriment on that part. But secondly, because they are all dead and in real tough condition, regardless, they really do need to come down.
Yeah, they're a hazard. Yeah, so cutting trees down along 117 in that area came to the commission before. I think it was the electric company that wanted to do it. And oh man, there was an outcry from the town against doing that. So it got a lot of attention. It sounds like these have to come down. They're really not going to affect that canopy. So that's great. So I would say just the tree form would be a good thing to fill out.
Okay. I can take a look at that and review it with the DPW director and go from there. Certainly. And the other comment too, in terms of an emergency certificate or things of that nature, nothing that the tree warden and I talked about when we were out there. There wasn't any indication that he wanted to take something down like immediately. There's certainly some that are in worse shape than others that probably more nervous about leaving there much longer. But my other understanding is because there's so many, they do want to get as many down as quickly as possible, but depending on budget, they may not all be coming down as part of one contract, for instance, as well. So it may be, for instance, they go in and do as much as they can as this year's budgets allow, and then immediately get the other ones. So I don't anticipate that it's going to be a one shot 40 trees at once type project either, if that's useful to the commission too.
Okay.
Great. Thanks, Brad. I'm not sure who was first. Dennis, go ahead. Dennis, you're on mute.
Sorry. A couple of things. one, I know, yeah, I don't, like Tom said, I don't need to see GPS or anything like that. It might be worth putting the miles or mile distance from the border that we roughly think these are going to be removed from, and a statement that they're in the right of way. I know that's kind of implied since it's the town that's doing that, but how far off the road we're going to be going back clearing these trees instead of marking each individual one, if we at least mark the location, the general location we're working with a little bit more detail. And then the other, like we mentioned, these are on the scenic road. I know there is an exemption for trees that need to come down because they're dead. But I think that's governed through the planning board, not us, right? Work along the scenic roads. So I'm not sure if there's additional work that needs to be done just to dot i's and cross t's on this.
Yeah, it's definitely not us, but there is a process.
Yeah. So, I mean, if they need to come down, they need to come down. They're dead. Let's get them down so they're not a hazard, but we should make sure we're doing it by the book.
Thanks, Dennis. David?
Yeah, obviously, if they're dead trees, they need to come down. That's, we don't want to have any hazards or anything, but, and this is probably beyond the scope of our commission to ask this question, but is it just a case of the area hasn't been pruned back, or as far as the 40 trees being dead, does this seem like more normal, or is there any cause to having so many dead trees along the road? Or is that just not even something we should be discussing? Like invasive species or something like that. Is it something where there might be a reason to cut them down other than just the fact that they're going to fall?
I can ask the tree warden if he's looked at it, closer than we did driving back and forth in the field, for instance. So we didn't get out and walk around and inspect each tree when we were out there. We did slow down and pull over and stop briefly to look at some, but for the most part, it was a observation from the windshield side window kind of thing, because it's not an area that you want to get out and walk around, and it's also the trees were pretty close to the edge of the road too. But I didn't look at it too much from a perspective as why are things dying? I mean, clearly they look dead. Some of them look like they might have been storm related, that I can tell you. Others, yeah, the way some of the bark was coming off, certainly disease took part in some of them too. Invasives, I frankly didn't look close enough to see if vines were cutting them off, or if we're talking pests, if we've got something venturing in town that we wouldn't want to see, like a Asian longhorn beetle or something like that. I couldn't tell you. I frankly didn't look at it close enough, other than, does it look like it's dead? Yes. Okay. Move on to the next one.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah. Go ahead, Jim.
That area, that stretch, has had a lot of flooding over the past couple of years, so it wouldn't surprise me if some of those trees died due to flooding. I mean, they're probably underwater for months at a time.
Yeah, I've noticed the flooding down there. I drive the road. My son's at Neshoba, so
Yeah.
But
this year is good. Last year was terrible.
yeah, exactly. But again, I would just like to know if if the trees are actually posing a hazard because of to the other existing trees, or if the area needs to be looked at from that point of view. Again, the Asian longhorn beetle was what came to mind for me, but
Gotcha. Yeah.
Okay, any further questions or comments? Brad, do you have what you need?
I think so. So nothing on the ground you need to see marked, no GPS, but if we can provide a better plan of some sort, just to mark where these are, show that they're in the right of way, in kind of relationship to the right of way where those are as well. and then look at the tree removal form as well that we have in town. And I know we talked about the process possibly being through planning board for this. I've only seen one correspondence in the past on a dead tree within the right of way. And my understanding from the town administrator's office is the tree warden can skip that process for something that's deemed a hazard. So again, he may want to go through that anyway, just because of the scope of the project, where it not being one tree, where it being 40. But it's not something that, to my understanding, is required for dead trees, for instance.
Okay. So continue this to our next meeting.
Yes, please. I'll formally request that.
Okay, I think that's September 24th. Happy to take a motion.
I'll make a motion to continue the 7 Bridge Road tree removal until our next meeting on September 24th.
Yep, second.
Great. Motions are made by David, seconded by Dennis, to continue the 24th. Any further discussion? This will be a roll call vote. Jim LaValle.
Aye.
Dennis Hubbard. You were on mute, Dennis.
Aye. Sorry.
Dave Millette.
Aye.
Tom Seidenberg also votes aye. It looks like Carl has dropped. Okay. So that's 4-0. Let's see. Next up on our agenda, we have enforcement order update 397 Centerbridge Road. Brad?
Yep. The update is, again, I don't have another update for you.
Okay.
I've still been unable to connect to the department, and as I probably briefly touched on earlier, if this goes much longer, I'm going to get a little concerned for various reasons. So I would think that if I don't have any luck in the next couple of weeks, I will probably at the next meeting suggest that we do see through, if we can possibly through the town administrator's office, get town council involved, not just for conservation on this, but also zoning as well, because of the floodplain. So there's a couple of different local bylaws that would come into play here with this violation. This might have been the quicker and easier one to go through wetlands, particularly with state assistance. But if we can't get to that point, I don't want to lose the ability to enforce it locally.
Okay. Great. Thanks, Brad. Commissioners, any questions, comments on that?
No.
Okay. We have next up voting for officers. I'm just going to table that past the next two items. So we have under discussion, I asked Brad to put these two topics on the agenda, and I'd like us as a commission to start making progress on some of these things. So I think in the past, I've mentioned that I'd like to do some updates to the bylaw, and then I kind of let it drop. We've had some pretty long meetings recently, but we've also had some short ones where we didn't have these items on the agenda. So I think these are going to be continuing items. And what I'd like for us to do as a commission is talk about some of the issues we've encountered recently with hearings. We've had this long debate on 10 Fire Road 54 about the meaning of those two exemptions. The Main Street project that we just approved, there was questions about how we interpret riverfront under the bylaw. I think we need to bring some clarity to these things, either through regulations or through updates to the bylaw. I think the list of resource areas plus their buffer zones in the bylaw language is kind of ambiguous because it's just one long list and it doesn't clearly state which buffer zones apply to which resource areas. And we've had questions from consultants and applicants on those things. So I'd like to start the ball rolling so that, if we do have language we want to change in the bylaw, we can be ready for the 2025 town meeting. I'm not looking for expansive changes. I think that, if we've got a couple of things, a couple of, tweaks just to clean up the language, I think that would be great. And then we can handle any of the details through regulations, because once the bylaw says you have the jurisdiction, then we can be very clear in the regulations. Now, speaking of the regulations, the consultants for the Main Street project that we just approved tonight, they basically said you don't have regulations or performance standards for the bylaw riverfront, and it's true, we don't really have that. I briefly discussed with Brad about whether it makes sense to kind of say in the regulations, the bylaw performance standards, if we otherwise don't have performance standards in the bylaw, to use the performance standards in, from 310 CMR, and just apply them to the increased jurisdiction that we have in town. I don't think that that's really workable per se, but it might be a starting point and provide some of the clarity that applicants and their consultants might want. I have seen other towns have some really detailed regulations, and I don't think that we want to do that. Like, I don't feel like we should go through the whole long process of coming up with 60 pages of regulations. Like, we don't need to, we don't want to rewrite 310 CMR 10 for Lancaster. But I do think we need to somehow state in our regulations that we have performance standards for the increased jurisdiction of the bylaw. And I don't know what form that would take, but I think we need to say it, and we need to give at least some guidance. So I'm kind of hoping folks can spend a little bit of time thinking about that and some of the issues we've had over the past few hearings, and maybe we can give ourselves some more clarity. I think one of the other things we've talked about, Jim and I have talked about it, a few years ago, there was an effort to define a buffer zone use table with respect to the bylaw buffer zone. Because the bylaw treats the buffer zone more strictly than the WPA, it would be helpful to us as a commission, but I think also to applicants, to say exactly what amount of encroachment into the buffer zone is allowable. We've certainly had commissioners in the past who viewed it as no encroachment into the buffer zone is allowable under the bylaw, because the bylaw is so strict. So I think we need to come to an agreement as a commission, what we think those lines are, and write them down. And that will give us some guidance and hopefully make some of these hearings go faster. Because there won't be as many gray zones. There's always going to be gray zones, but I'm kind of hoping maybe I'm fooling myself. So I don't know, do you guys have any comments or questions?
This use table would be a guidance, right? It wouldn't be a binding table.
Yeah, so the one that Greg Jackson came up with, I think he was influenced by other towns. It was like 3 levels. It was yes, no, and maybe. So these things are categorically allowed. These things are categorically disallowed to certain depths within the buffer zone. And then there was, with permission, right?
Okay. I like that, actually. So it at least it narrows down the gray area.
Right.
Right.
I think that, and clearing up a lot of the definitions and the verbiage within the bylaw just to make it consistent and a little more clear. Tom, you pointed out a couple areas where we've run into issues. I think we could do a lot there to clear up. I know we also think there was some riverfront times we went back and forth on. It wasn't very clear, consistent from one section to the other, what was allowed and what wasn't. And so I think there was a lot of maintenance we could do just to make our lives easier and the applicants easier too.
Yeah.
Right. And my hope, maybe it's a false hope, is that some of these hearings will be faster because it'll be more obvious what the answer is. I don't know, Brad, do you have any comments on any of that?
Well, again, my brief window being here, I wouldn't anticipate a lot, hopefully, like the 10 Fire Road 54 type cases, for instance. But a lot of the other stuff, even though it might not be really well defined, or applicants, consultants may not buy into this is what it says, they, for the most part, approach the projects that way. But again, I haven't been around enough to see what the problems are, what they aren't. But I know when I've talked it over, at least with one or two of you before, briefly about changes, I wholeheartedly believe that there's enough problems with the bylaw itself that you couldn't begin to fix things just with tweaks to the regulations. So that really would have to start from the bottom, with that, and then work your way on. That would involve going to town meeting and other things at some point for that too. There's just too much wrong with the bylaw itself that needs to be fixed first. Unless there's something more urgent, for instance, you wanted to tweak regulations for other reasons, but to fix a lot of what I think we've been dealing with lately, that's a bylaw fix. And the way I've read it from day one, my arrival here, I would have bet my life savings that wouldn't have passed through the Attorney General's office. So I'm surprised it got adopted ultimately with the language that's there, because it just, there's so much that's not well defined in it, let's say. I reread it at least half a dozen times trying to make sense of it myself. So I think we really need to fix that, and then move on to the regulations from there. But without that really well-defined sections of the bylaw, you can't ultimately hook the regulations to that. You can't correct a mistake in that with some more clarity in the regulations. You can in some other areas, but not where you aren't really getting the jurisdiction that you think you are. And that's what I'm reading is what's happening a lot with the bylaw because of the lack of definitions. I think people could argue in different cases there's no jurisdiction here the way it's written. What does it say? And it's you kind of see where they're coming from at times. So I think it's most important to try to get that fixed first.
Okay. Right. Let's see if we can get something on the warrant next year. And then discussion about open space. So I think I've mentioned in the past, I did spend some time a while back trying to understand exactly what lands the commission owns or has CRs for. So I think we need to embark on an effort to get that list buttoned down, and then also understand how all of our lands can be accessed and utilized by the citizens of Lancaster. There's a trail map on the commission website. I think we need to understand how real those trails are, who's responsible for maintenance. A lot of those trails, are on commission lands, but they also lead to private lands or land trust lands or other conservation organization lands. So I think we need to understand that and make sure that, we're not publishing a map of trails that, people would be trespassing on. And then finally, I think we need to understand and define what valid uses are of our lands. You know, what activities can you do? Horseback riding, hunting, bicycles, motorbikes. Like, we need to understand what's in, what's out. You know, and publish that on our on the commission's page, and possibly signage on our major properties. Right, certainly at the Cook Conservation Area, it should be posted. What's allowable and what's not allowable. At a minimum, that one, since that's our largest property. But we also have significant other properties. And I did just learn today that the Capital Group properties that the town voted to accept at the last town meeting, there will be an article on the warrant at the in October to transfer those two properties to the control of the commission. Finally, wrapping up the whole 2017 settlement agreement with Capital Group. So those parcels, one of them is directly adjacent to Cook Conservation, so that's a natural addition to the Cook Conservation Area, and the other is adjacent to a parcel the commission already has control of that has frontage on 117, although that frontage is only like an access strip. It's like a 10 or 20 foot wide access strip. But it adds additional backlands between 117 and the river, where in theory there's trails. According to the trail map on the commissioner website, there's trails, but I've never been over there. I have no idea if those trails exist or not. Yeah, so that's a summary. So if you guys could think about that. These items are going to stay on the agenda, and when we have shorter meetings, I'd like to have a more in-depth conversation about some of these things, but I don't think that's tonight. So commission reorganization, we've been putting this off for a couple months. Sadly, Carl had to drop, it seems, so he's not on, but we need to do this. We need to reorganize and either revote the current officers or vote new ones. So happy to take nominations for chair of the commission.
So, Tom, I think you've been doing a fantastic job, so I nominate you for chair.
I will second that nomination.
So I will happily continue as chair, but I also think that it would be good if we, I think in some other boards in the town, they rotate chairmanship. Certainly you see the select board, they used to rotate it every year. So I'll be happy to continue, but I think that we should be training people up to rotate. So sure, but I might defer next time. So
point taken. Do we need to vote?
So I think we do. So I think Jim nominated me and Dennis seconded for chair. This will be a roll call vote. Jim LaValle.
Aye.
Dennis Hubbard.
Aye.
David Millett.
Aye.
Tom Seidenberg. I will abstain. And for vice chair, I'd be happy to renominate Jim for vice chair if you want the vice chair again.
Yeah, I'm happy to do it for a while longer. Sure.
I will second Jim.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, this will be a roll call vote. Jim LaValle.
Abstain.
Dennis Hubbard.
Aye.
David Millett.
Aye.
Tom Seidenberg also votes aye. All right. I don't think we need clerk since we have staff to do the minutes, but I didn't see minutes for either of the August meetings. Brad, were there no updated minutes?
No, Yep, I'm unmuted. There was a set just completed for the 13th. I have to fill in a couple of the blanks on that because the recording started about 10 minutes late. So I've got to take my notes and do what Roz couldn't do. So I will get those out. And then the 27th draft has not been completed yet.
Okay. And that completes our agenda. Does anyone have anything else to discuss tonight? Yep, go ahead, Brad.
So a couple of quick things. So one of the things that tends to happen when you create a bylaw and it's in existence for many years and it doesn't get updated at the same frequency as, say, the State Wetlands Protection Act, or even updated at all necessarily. You run into these little minor differences at times between our bylaw and the state regulations. So when our bylaw was created, it probably had the language at the time that the two options with the butter notifications, which would be the certified mail or hand delivery, and you get your signatures through the hand delivery. The state at some point updated it to hand delivery, certified mail, or certificates of mail-in. Somebody just filed a notice of intent application with us today. There was close to 200 abutters. They did not do certified mail. They did certificates of mail-in. So I immediately pointed that out to them. But because we happened to have the meeting tonight, I thought I would ask the question to anyone that's here in the commission now, if you've run into this before in terms of whether or not the commission's been okay with accepting certificates of mail-in, or otherwise if we should stick with what the bylaw says and know it has to be certified mail.
I'm not aware of ever running into this.
Brad, for my complete ignorance here, what's the difference?
So certified mail, basically there's a return receipt involved. So you get a stamped receipt at the post office that gives, if you were to take an envelope down to the post office, Dennis, you'd get a receipt that says you'd mail it. You have that receipt that says you mailed it, and then at some point there would be a return receipt once the recipient received it, signed it, and then you'd get that green card back. So there's those two pieces there.
Yeah, I'm familiar with the certified, not the other one.
Oh, the certificates. Okay, sorry. So
Nope,
the certificates.
I wasn't clear, so that was definitely on me.
Yep. Yeah. So the certificate of mail-in, it's basically an 8.5 by 11 sheet with, I think, up to 6 addresses per page, and it lists all of the mail recipients on that you're sending letters to. So if you had a stack of 200, you would have all those pages filled out with those 200 addresses. Somebody at the post office would take all those envelopes and verify that every address on those envelopes matches everything that's on that sheet, and then they would just stamp all of those sheets, and that would be your receipt. And there's no return receipt for that. So it's just basically a receipt that says, yes, you mailed it to all these abutters. How that may play out in the real world of importance, quite frankly, I've flip-flopped on my opinion on that over the years. I've always liked, earlier in my career, the certified mail receipts, even though, with the update, you had the certificate of mail option, but I liked the certified mail receipts because I used to have to deal with many residents at the counter who would say, I never got notified of this project. And, the hearing might have been closed and a decision issued at that point, for instance. And I can't tell you how many times, more times than you would have guessed, but I was always able to go grab those green cards, show that individual and say, isn't this you that signed for this, that you got this notice? And it was a handy tool to have. But it also may not be necessary. So there's that part of it. Lately, particularly since COVID hit, I see the post office maybe not being as stellar as they used to be with their mail-in, for instance, as well as, for whatever reason, people that do get certified mail envelopes, more and more frequently, they don't want to pick them up. So I can tell you in my short time here, I've mailed out so many decisions certified mail because we're supposed to or obligated to, even though I've already sent out an email copy. And those are going unclaimed or in coming back to us. So from the certified mail part, it's nice to have the signature that somebody got it and say, no, you really knew about it. But if you really want the public to know that this is happening, and you've got like 200 abutters, for instance, might be an important hearing. They're probably more apt to get a piece of mail if it's just certificate of mail-in. If it's something that they're not home for and they have to sign for and go get, they either may not do it or they may not do it in a timely manner that, when they get the notification from the post office, they may not go and pick that up until after the hearing's already happened. So I guess in summary, lately, I'm more inclined to think that in terms of abutter notices of being of value, probably the certificates of mail-in is the most effective right now because it gives you the best chance of somebody actually getting a piece of mail. And two, other than being able to show somebody, yes, you got it, you signed for it, there's no additional value over the return receipt I see other than that. And that's only valuable to me as staff when somebody's complaining at the counter for half an hour, I was never notified and you're not doing your job and those kinds of things. But that's really not too important if you can provide evidence that everybody did statutorily what they were supposed to do. And under the state regs, it's either or, the certified mail, the certificate of mailing. But our bylaw says certified mail. So before I went and told them, sorry, you need to notify those close to 200 abutters certified mail like the bylaw says, I thought I would at least bring it up tonight to see if anybody had heard anything or experienced anything different. Because what is it, $8 a piece or whatever? It's going to be a significant cost and thing to redo as well.
Yeah, so I don't, like Jim, I don't remember this coming up before. Jim's been on the commission longer than me, but I don't know that we would have known necessarily if it happened. And
I wouldn't necessarily have known. I don't know if we have Tom Christopher still. He would know if it had occurred.
I guess my only other thought, Brad, is so it is in the regulations, and I feel like if the applicant doesn't do it, it provides a reason to appeal for anyone who's opposed to their project. So I personally feel uncomfortable telling them that it's fine and then having that come back to bite us or them if eventually it gets appealed, and then essentially the decision gets shot down because we didn't follow the law. Having said that, if it's a trivial project that nobody's going to care about, then who's going to appeal it? So, I don't feel comfortable making a judgment on that, knowing what the project is, whether I feel like anyone's going to care about the project or not. So I don't want you to tell me who it is because I don't know who it is. But that is a risk, right? That if it's controversial either way, controversial for the town or controversial for the applicant, it's best to just dot the I's, cross the T's, and suck it up and do it. We could change it later. Since it's a regulation, we can change it anytime we want with proper meeting notice. But it's too late for these folks.
Okay. Yeah, I don't disagree with you at all. My main reason for bringing it up is if the commission may have weighed in on the past, for whatever reason, then there might have been some precedent to be able to tell a person otherwise. But yes, that's to your point, Tom. When I look at our bylaw and regulations, I want to be able to point to everybody that we represent that we're doing things the way we're supposed to, and that's why I immediately emailed the applicant and said these are supposed to be certified mail. So if there's something that we can correct and the consensus is having to do it the way the regulations say, and you don't even have to make a decision on it. I would just simply, tell them to do that tomorrow. Absent any other evidence, let's say.
So honestly, I think that you should just tell them that they have to redo it.
Absolutely.
Because that's what the regulations say, and I don't want to be responsible for this blowing up if someone gets mad later. Having said that, I also have no problem with us changing the regulation to give folks the cheaper option. I don't see, this is an outlier. We don't often have an application with 200 abutters. That's generally the railroad and the electric company, right? But and the railroad never comes to us anyway, so it wouldn't be them. But sure, I mean, I don't see why we need to unnecessarily burden folks to spend $200 when they can spend only $50 notifying the abutters. Yeah, let's change the regulation.
Yeah. Okay. And then the other quick thing I had, and this one's a little bit easier. And again, it kind of goes along that same path of we don't necessarily update our information with the same frequency that the state does. In other factors as well. So we have our filing fee schedule on the website. There's a lot of language in that was particularly confusing to some applicants as of late, and confusing in the sense that they don't know the difference between the state and bylaw regulations all that well and how that comes into play. So the state portion that's on our instruction sheet there, quite frankly, I'd like to just eliminate and scrap. It's a separate process. All it seems to do is confuse people. And if the state fees and other things, if they were to update them next week and we weren't paying attention, then we're still showing the incorrect state fees and things on our form, which is something that's completely different. So I'm planning on doing at least a tweak to that for the commission to look at, hopefully maybe for next meeting. And it's just, like I said, it's the instruction sheet with the fees on it. Because I think that needs an update. It doesn't need a regulation update. It doesn't need a bylaw update. It just needs are we providing the public the best thing that we should be providing them at the application stage. So I want to get rid of some of the things that lead to confusion there. The other thing I wanted to mention, and this comes up quite a bit, and frankly, I've addressed it without updating that form, is the legal advertisement fee. So on that sheet, it does list it as being $50, and the fees are well way beyond that. And it's listed under the local regulation section for the fees. But in reality, it's not a local regulation fee. The applicant is obligated under state regs to pay for that, whatever that fee may be. If it's $5 or if it's $200, so you don't even have to list a fee there. So I've been telling people up front when I know applications are coming in, this is what the legal ad has been. This is what you owe us, not this $50. But because it's still sitting up there on that form, some people that aren't reaching out to us ahead of time are sending in the application with just that $50. And then I have to quickly call them and say, no, we need more money. And I think someone in the department downstairs mentioned that the legal ad fee may have come up shortly before my arrival in town too. But I wanted to point that out. So yes, we're addressing it to make sure that, we're not spending more money on the fees than we're taking in. But no, it's listed on the form incorrectly still. So I want to get that fixed along with, a couple other tweaks and get it to you, and hopefully we can have a better discussion about it at the next meeting.
Sure. Yeah. Happy to make changes to those forms, whatever you think is appropriate. And yeah, I did have a discussion with Brianna. She brought it up to me in her brief time with us that the town was actually looking to move away from the item for timing reasons. But then she left, so I don't know what came of it after that.
So we're using the Worcester Telegram now
Yep.
for that same very reason. Yeah, it's challenging when you get applications because people always want to drop them off last minute, or they can't appreciate that you need time to look through it, make sure it's complete, type all the legal ads, and then get them submitted. And that doesn't happen in just a few hours like applicants would hope that they can make it happen. So in an effort to try to get them in as close to the next meeting as possible, rather than push them off an extra meeting, for instance, the Worcester Telegram is the paper you have to use for that to give us more opportunity to get those legal ads done. The next thing I'll bring up while everyone's here is we got a lot of applications this week, some big ones as well. So I anticipate that we're going to be pretty busy for a while. I also wanted to let the commission know that because of the amount of work coming in, and also, Tom, you and I had this discussion shortly after I started here in town. I do want to make sure that we are getting things up on our website, similar to other boards. And we had a staff discussion with that today. So starting before our next meeting in 2 weeks, I anticipate that we'll have our agenda materials up there for you to start looking at. And my goal is for this upcoming meeting 2 weeks from now. Certainly, I want to start getting a lot of those materials up there this week. So should you have time, this weekend and then the next weekend, like I said, there's quite a bit coming in, and some of them are big projects. So I think this would, once we get the electronic copies, we can just throw them on the website right away. And then I don't have to be worried about, geez, so I keep blasting the commission with 10 separate emails here and there with things that are attached, which is, a terrible method as far as I'm concerned. I don't like doing it, and I don't know if you like getting it that way. So the website should help fix all of that. I also understand the town is going to be updating the website at some point. I think this fiscal year. So there'll be some changes there as well. So which has been a little bit of my hesitance to try to learn it better, because I was having some difficulty doing certain things with it, and knowing it was going to be updated. I was happy to wait until the new system came online, but we've just got so much going on, and we need to get things to the commission better and the public better as well. So I think that's going to help everyone involved, and like I said, you'll start seeing things before next meeting up there.
Great. Anything else, Brad?
That's all I have. I don't want to keep anyone here longer than they have to be.
All right. Great. Happy to take a motion to adjourn.
I will make a motion to adjourn.
I will second.
Right. Motion's been made by Dennis, seconded by David to adjourn. This will be a roll call vote. Jim LaValle. We didn't hear you, Jim.
Yeah.
Dennis Hubbard.
Aye.
David Millett.
Aye.
Tom Seidenberg also votes aye. Thank you, everyone.